Hello, and welcome to A Little Good News, spreading God's good news, if only a Saturday at a time. My name is Isaiah, and welcome back. Today, as you know, is our fourth episode, and our second episode in the new year. I wanted to thank you for coming back, or if you're a new listener, for joining us today. I hope that you will all learn something about today. Because today, we're talking about something that people don't usually like to talk about. Death. Now, death, as we know scientifically, is the ceasing of biological functions, of cell reproduction, of breathing, heartbeat, and brain function. That is definition of death. So, when I talk about death, I have to be a little bit more specific in today's episode, which means we have to go over the three types of death. Now, for those of you who don't know, there are three main types of what we would call death, or the ceasing of the functions that we just talked about. The first one is legal death. Now, we're not going to spend a bunch of time on this because legal death is basically saying that the government has noticed that you are dead. You have a death certificate, you have a doctor's declaration that you are dead, and that you have an identified corpse. That's legal death, which we don't have to talk about. Here's where it gets interesting. Clinical death. Clinical death is the death that most of us will experience with old age, where, in definition, it is the ceasing of vital functions. So, heartbeat, lung, your respiratory system. This does not include the brain. Notice that. The vital functions that they're talking about do not include the brain, which you have to be more specific with a later kind of death. But clinical death, believe it or not, is used a lot in hospitals. If you have a surgery, usually if they're going close to any vital organs, if they want to minimize blood loss, what they'll do is they'll put it into a machine. They'll pump all their blood into a machine. And what they'll do is they'll pump it. So basically this machine is acting as your heart. Well, it goes to the heart, and the heart starts beating for a minute, and then it slows, and eventually basically stops. So, you have no heartbeat, number one, and B, you don't need to breathe, because A, you're in anesthesia, or you're out cold, and your heart's not beating, so therefore you've experienced clinical death. Clinically, you are dead. Your brain hasn't stopped functioning, you're all good, you're not going to feel pain. And doctors will do this to minimize blood loss so you don't gush if they nick something, because these guys aren't robots. And so, people realized that they had to be more specific when talking about death, especially in hospitals. And so, here comes our third, brain death. Now, brain death is special, because both from legal death and clinical death, you can come back, technically. In clinical death, they just pump all the blood back in you, sew you right up, and you're good to go. You don't know that anything else happened because they kept your vital organs alive. They kept your brain pumping. No brain damage or damage whatsoever. You're good. Brain death, it's irreversible because once your brain's neurons stop firing, once your brain ceases to function, you are dead. There is no bringing you back to life. It's the end-all of the end-all, which when we think of death, we think of this end-all. And that's what I kind of want to talk about today. Death being an end-all, which for many of us it is. And we're afraid of death because it is this black curtain in front of us that we have no idea what's behind the curtain. Now, Christians, we have some idea, but there's no one that has come back and told us this is what death feels like. None of us have any idea what death will feel like. And for many of us, that is a terrifying thing. Now, I know my heart is right with the Lord, so I'm not afraid of death at all, but the fear of the unknown strikes fear, deep terror into the heart of many, many people. And what's funny is if you look in Songs of Solomon 8:6, it says, "Set me as a seal upon thine heart, as a seal upon thine arm, for love is strong as death. Jealousy is cruel as the grave. The coals thereof are coals of fire, which hath a most vehement flame." Now, because this is King James Version, it's not a very understandable thing unless you study the verse and really think about it. And because I have a study Bible, I get a little reference down below. And it says, the seal is the most valuable possession by which all persons' possessions are identified. So, a seal, it identifies you. Strong as death is a stark metaphor, showing that just as death conquers, so does love. But perhaps it implies love has the last word. If death conquers morality, then love may as well. And at first when I read this, it struck me as odd. Love having the last word? Love conquering morality? It's kind of weird. It's a strange metaphor to make. Then you think about it. Love is one of the strongest emotions that people have. People have love. People have died because of love. People have killed because of their love. People have done things that no person would ever do again for love. Like Jesus on the cross, which we will get to in another episode, the science of the cross. But that was extremely painful. That was one of the most agonizing torture methods of all time. Not counting some of the really, really dirty ones that we're not going to talk about. But that was one of the worst torture methods of that time. And he went through it. Not saying a single word, not crying out, not grunting, not moaning. He took it. And he took it for us. And so, we see that love is a very, very powerful emotion. And we see that it is being compared to death as the end-all. As another curtain. And what strikes me is these two curtains lead to the same place. Especially in a Christian's case. They lead to joy. With death sometimes leading in another direction. To hell. To agony. To pain. But for right now, we're going to talk about joy. And I get a lot of questions. And we as a society now have forced joy and happiness together. The unlikely couple, joy and happiness. Now just hearing those words, you immediately assume that they're the same thing. They're not. And that's what I press upon people, is when we think the joy of the Lord, we always think happiness. We always think that we have to be happy. And that's not true. Joy is defined in the Merriam-Webster Dictionary as a source or a cause of great happiness. It's not simply a feeling that we sometimes get, this state that we sometimes feel, as we see with happiness and its definition being the quality or state of being happy. So happiness is being happy, which many of us are happy a lot of the time. But life is a roller coaster, and I think we can all agree with that. Life is just a wild roller coaster with ups and downs. So you can be happy and you can be sad. It's kind of a balance of the two. And sometimes it feels like the sad is a lot longer than the happy. But you're striving for joy. Because those who have joy will always have happiness. It's not a joy and happiness are synonyms. You have one, so you have the other. So I can have happiness on its own without joy, which will last a short time. But then I can have joy, and I'll always have happiness. That's what many people don't get. You don't have to be happy all the time. That's not something. But you can be joyful. Many times that I'm down, my heart is broken for the people that I see around me. No, I'm not very happy in that moment, but I'm joyful because the Lord has broken my heart for these people. Therefore, in my weakness, I am strong for Him. And another weird thing that we see with these two curtains with love and death is that they cross over. In 1 John 3:14, when we know that we have passed from death to life because we love each other. Anyone that does not love remains in death. And again, my study Bible tells me in 1 John 3:14, our assurance of salvation rests in part on the love that God gives us for fellow believers. If we have this love, it is a sign of our salvation. If not, we are warned to examine our hearts before God. So our salvation, our assurance of salvation, is kind of resting on whether we can love others. And that's a huge, huge thing. We need to examine our hearts before God and really think, do I love others? And not love as in kiss on them and hug them and act unnormally, because that's just going to get you pointed at and made fun of. But do you love them? And a good test that I would say is, if you had the chance to do something for them, would you do it? If they needed something, would you jump at the chance, or would you sludge along? Because you look at your parents, if you had a good example, they would do anything for you. And it's because they loved you. So we see that death is kind of a holding cell. And that people who love, who care, can pass over into joy, into love, into life. And in science, this makes absolutely no sense. Absolutely none. There are certain laws in the universe, and these laws dictate many of the things that you see around you. One such law is that you cannot make order out of chaos, because those are the two main forces in this universe, order and chaos. The universe was once orderly, and because of a thing called entropy, which is the breaking down of things, meaning things get more and more unorderly, like your headbuds or your headphones in your pocket, how they always get tangled. That's entropy, because there's more ways for this thing to be tangled than there is to be untangled. And so we see that in this entropy of things can only go one way. It's a one-way street to chaos. Chaos, of course, can come from order, but order cannot come from chaos. You cannot reverse this entrochaic cycle, I guess you would say. But here we see we can. We have passed from death into life. If someone dies of old age, the entropy has gone into their body. They have been decaying and decaying, their cells becoming more unruly, and we see them die of natural causes. They have experienced entropy firsthand. So death we can see as chaos, and life we can see as more orderly because we have not passed into the chaos. So we can see we've just beaten this cycle that has been a law of the universe, a law that has not been broken. For as long as humans have remained here, this law has not been broken. Until here, we see it being broken. And especially with Jesus. He broke this law. He came back. He conquered death. He conquered chaos. So that we could also, and you really get a sense of how big this is. That Jesus didn't just die on the cross, that it was more of a law being broken, a fundamental force of the universe being torn apart. And on a scientific scale, this is ginormous. Now, for the non-scientists out here, this is just me rambling, but this is huge. Because the fundamental forces of the universe are what we build our basis and our values on. And suddenly one gets stripped away. One gets broken. We don't know what to do. Science falls apart in that instance. And it falls apart because of love. Because anyone who does not love remains in death. But if you have love, you will pass into death, from death into life. Because you have loved not only Jesus, but you have loved the people around you. You have passed from death. You have passed from death row, execution. You're gone to life. If you guys have ever seen any movies or books where they have an infection, an example being The Accidental Hero, which is a great little book about Jack Blank, who gets a disease that no one has ever survived. Within minutes, you turn into this kind of zombie-like creature. Within minutes, you start seeing signs of decay and death. It's been 48 hours. Nothing. He acts normal. He's been fine. And this blows the minds of everyone else. But they're still skeptical because they still hold on to their beliefs even when it's been broken. They hold on to this thing where you're dead, you're gone, you're part of them. And they're not, and he's not. He's passed from death into life. And no, not in this case because of love, because of an immunity. But love is our immunity in this thing. A verse that I quite like that explains this a bit more is Psalms 30:5. For his anger only lasts a moment, but his favor lasts a lifetime. Weeping may remain for a night, but rejoicing comes in the morning. These feelings that we feel so intense and raw as love, as hatred, as anger, they only last for a moment. They only last for the night. But in the morning we see rejoice, we see joy. Because feelings are only temporary. As we see in the Spanish language, yo estoy contento means I am happy. Estoy meaning to be. Well, there's a rule. You use estar when something is temporary. You use ser when something is more permanent. Yo soy Isaiah Brown. I am Isaiah Brown. My name is permanent on me. It does not change 5 to 10 years from now. Yo estoy contento. In 10 years, I may not be happy. But I will be Isaiah Brown. Now, a lot of this may have just seemed like me rambling, and I hope you guys got something out of this. Though my main point throughout this was that joy and love go hand in hand. You can have love and joy. And in that same sense, love and death are two sides of the same coin. And not only that death is not an end-all. It's a curtain, it's a doorway that leads to two places. And whether that place is joy or somewhere else is for you to decide. Now, many people don't believe that they can accept joy. They don't feel like they deserve it. And I'm going to be honest. They don't. I don't. No one on this earth deserves redemption, salvation, joy, grace, mercy. No one does. But you know what? It's a gift. We have been given an amazing gift. And it breaks my heart every day to see people who don't even unwrap it. To see people who say, I'm fine on my own. I can do this. And they open that door. And it does not lead to joy. All they find is sadness, despair, anger, lust, greed, trying to fill this void that they've been put in. It kind of looks like we're out of time for today. And this is going to be one of the longer episodes, so let's just go ahead and pray. Lord, we just thank you for this wonderful, wonderful day. Lord, that you've given me, Lord, that you've given all these listeners. Lord, I ask that you would just bless every single one of them. Lord, that they would just give all their cares to you. Lord, because you and I both know they can't carry them on their own. Lord, and through this new year, I ask that they would just be blessed and joyful. Not only happy, but joyful. And joyful because of you. In your mighty name, amen. Thank you again for listening to today's episode. Please leave any suggestions or comments below. I'm just getting this channel started, and I kind of need some help on this. So please, if you have any comments or conjunctions, or comments or suggestions, please be constructive criticism. Please leave them down below. And also, if you have any prayer requests or anything that you'd like me to pray for, please leave them down below. Thank you once again very much for listening, and remember, be blessed. Movie